So the first batch of Delta's parts are almost done. Once it's done, we're going to go through the process of essentially taking it out of the printer. We're going to walk through the separation from the build plate, cleaning process, a separate process I do with some warm water to facilitate separating some of the actual supports, and then lastly, curing. This is the general process that you will go through for every resin printer. It may be a little different depending on the resin you're using, but we just want to walk through that whole process. You'll notice that I have gloves, and I have 2 layers of gloves. I'll have cotton gloves on here. Because right now, the resin in the printer is actually at 40 degrees Celsius to facilitate printing. So when I go to take the build plate off, all that resin is still going to be really hot. So if you're taking it right off after you're printing, it's probably a good idea to have something underneath your gloves that is meant to absorb some of that thermal energy. So while we're waiting for the last percentage or two of the build to finish, we're going to prep our station. And once we're taking it out of the printer, there's a couple things we're going to want to have. The first thing is a tool that we will use to separate the build from the build plate, and that I already have this out of the cleaning station. Once we have separated the parts, we're not going to worry about the supports yet. We're going to place them in here and go ahead and wash it with supports, and then we'll deal with what occurs after that shortly. Alright, so Delta's first batch of parts is finished, but I want to show you what this looks like to essentially remove this from the printer. Now, as mentioned, you always want to wear gloves when you're dealing with resin, but when you're dealing with resin fresh out of the printer, you want to have thermally protected gloves. Now, when you buy the elegoo, this is probably the easiest part to lose. This is actually the drip tray. So we're going to open the printer so you can see the parts are suspended downward from the platform. We're going to set the drip tray right here. The purpose of that is to catch any excess resin as we pull it out. We release the build plate, which allows us to pull it towards us. That is definitely hot. Then we're going to set this down to begin separating the parts. Now, we're going to separate these from the build plate using this tool. We just kind of get behind one of the parts. And a lot of times they just pop off like that. We're just going to put it in the bin. You can't see the bin because I want you to see the plate instead. And because then the bin is going to go into an alcohol bath. And you might probably ask, why are we washing these parts? Well, these did come out of a resin. While the resin cured, mostly, that's how we got these parts, they literally did rise up out of the resin. So the outer layer, even though the parts we want cured, are still covered in resin. It doesn't come off very cleanly in water, and while you can buy water washable resins, as a precaution, if you do get a water washable resin, you can't put that water down the drain. It's not exactly safe. So in order to clean this, we're going to use isopropyl alcohol. 90% or greater is fine. You can buy actually solvents or cleaners for resin. I just use alcohol because it's easier to get. I mean, you can get it at CVS or wherever. You'll also notice that this tears away at the plate. Over time, this is a replaceable part. You will inevitably, just like your screen, just like your LCD, need to replace these parts. Also need to be kind of careful because right now the parts are warm and still kind of moldable. Bulk of part right here. There we go. Actually started to separate from the supports. Not surprising considering they are warm. So, I'll show you how this works. These literally just set into the alcohol bath. Like this. That smell is potent as sin. And then we're just gonna lock one side, lock the other. And we're gonna turn this on. We're going to let this run for about 6 minutes. What this does is there's an agitator down here that spins, that rotates the alcohol around the parts and starts to wash the resin away. Once this gets to halfway, it's going to stop and rotate the other way just to make sure we're cleaning as much as we can. Once that's done, we're going to take the bin back out, put it here, dry the parts off a little bit, and then we're going to move them to the curing station. For now, though, this is the mess that you get. There's a lot of resin left here. This needs to be cleaned off so that it can be set back. So that's what we're going to do now. But I'll turn the camera back on in a second when we go through the curing process. So now, as we wait for the last minute and a half or so for the cleaning station to finish, we've got some other stuff set up. A common tool that we will use during separation of supports, and a bowl of hot water, not boiling. So this is around just as hot as your spigot can get it. The reason for this is, as you get used to doing this more and more often, you will notice that when you tear the supports away, a lot of times it leaves marks on the figure. We generally have to sand those away. One of the things you can do to minimize that risk is to drop the supports into hot water, which loosens the resin back up and makes it easier to separate. Less aggressive, less chance of it actually tearing the part itself. Not perfect, and in the end you can always still sand the figure down once it's been cured, and that is always a last resort. If after curing we still have a lot of pock marks or divots, then we will sand those away with a small Dremel tool so that we have a flat surface to apply paint to. Nothing better than the fucking reek of that alcohol. So now that it's come out, we still got all these parts. This has a lot of supports on it because it's a large port. So we're going to drop the section that has the supports into the hot water, and I can actually see resin kind of separate away from the part. That's just, even though we're cleaning it, look how clean that is. Even though we're cleaning it, we did clean it, there's still going to be resin on there, and that's going to be the case until it's cured. So that's why, generally as a rule of thumb, you shouldn't use your bare hands until it has been completely cured. There's some little supports there. Those are normal. I'm not worried about those. We'll set this down and move to the next part. Same thing. We're going to set the supports into hot water. Try not to get the part in the hot water, just because it does loosen up the resin. You don't want to risk deformations at all. This is very brittle. Normally, I would also recommend using a face shield when doing this, because these break. You don't want this getting on your face. But just like any contact, if you get res on your skin, it's just a little bit of water and soap to clean it off. It's not going to hurt you. You just don't want it to stay on you and cure, which is technically possible. Like if you are doing this late at night like I am, there's no sunlight coming through, so nothing naturally in the environment is going to cure this resin. So it can stick to you, and you'll notice, because like the things that you use a lot when printing resin parts, like your cleaning station, they'll get really sticky as resin kind of builds up on it. It can just stick to you, you go to bed, and then the next day wake up and go outside, and then it will cure on your skin, and that's when you get into a bad situation. Alright, so that cleaned away. There are some pocks here. I'm just going to cut off. It's kind of a satisfying sound when they do break off. This is a pre-supported figure from the person who made the STL. Because if you're a lazy fuck like me, and you just use Chi2 Box Pro and say auto support, you get some kind of really rough behavior. These bodies are these kind of very tightly joined structures. The supports can actually join together during printing, which makes it very difficult to remove them, because now all of a sudden they're not brittle. They have a lot more tensile strength. So people who are familiar with the geometry of their figure, a lot of times will provide you with a pre-supported, generally in lychee, in an STL form. Most of the figures that I look at are going to be STL in the end, but a lot of times they're done with lychee. I just don't use that as my slicer. My slicer is Chi2 Box Pro, because like I said, I'm a lazy fuck, and I just want to be able to click a few buttons and print a thing, because I'm not a specialist. I'm just overly dedicated. So this part is really interesting, because it's the bangs. Let's see how this cleans off. Hair, like this, not really worried about, but these strands that hang off of it, you got to be careful about when you're actually tearing the supports away, because those parts are brittle. So I'm going to be a little bit more cautious with this. Tear away the front supports if I can. Yeah, there we go. There. So you can see that part is flexing a lot, just as the supports are coming away. No. I have had in the past parts break during this process. Normally, not with ABS resin. That is something I would see with a traditional resin, like an actual, especially the 8K resins, the really high resolution ones, because they sacrifice. Let's make sure I don't have any other really big. It doesn't really matter because even if these stay on there when you cure, they'll snap off the same way. That was an odd support. Another thing is this water, don't throw down the drain. When you're done with this, you're just going to throw this outside because what's going to happen, all that resin that's left over from the cleaning and the actual just coming off the part, that will cure in the sun and then it won't matter. It's basically just plastic at that point. But if you pour it down the drain, you're going to have a bad time. Ooh, that came off. I was worried that was going to be problematic because of how jumbled together that support was, but it actually came off pretty cleanly. A lot of detail here. Not really sure what part is a support and what's not, so I'm not going to fuck with it for the most part. A lot of time, and also, do not forget to check your negative cavities. Not now, but when you're after you've done curing, and you may be getting ready for assembly, don't assemble immediately. Paint first, then assemble. But check your cavities. A lot of times, depending on how they're built and how they're supported, they will actually have support sections in them, and you need to get those out. Otherwise, you'll never get a flush connection from the part. Not the end of the world. A lot of times it's, I have a set of small tweezers for the really tight, hard to get to parts. They come with most 3D printing kits, just like this just came in a 3D printing kit for tools. So, there we go. Came off cleanly too. Almost done. We got a few more small pieces. This may seem tedious. This is the tedious part. Hand. Water starting to cool off now. That had a support on the inside. Got some supports for the fingers. I'm not going to worry about right now. I'm always nervous about these really small parts. Hearing the cracking makes me worry that I'm actually breaking the part. Which, I mean, it's not the end of the world. You can reprint it, but like this was a 5-hour build. Pretty normal. It's not a lot. I'm just maximizing what I can get out of the build plate. This is unique. This is not a common support structure. Let's see if they break away or if they will have to be cut up. No, it seems like it'll give. Oh. So, the things I want to demonstrate. If you look on the front of the face, I'm going to try to get those little supports away. They're in the mouth, which I don't know why they're in there. But I'll show you the back side of this. You can see all these little divots. That's what's left over when you get an aggressive support. On the inside parts, it's not a big deal because this is going to be the inside. But what you want to look for is like here, you can see there's still some remnants of it. Those are all going to have to be sanded down after curing. Now, though, what we're going to do is prep to move to curing station. Just going to set this back in here now. So this is pretty straightforward. This is literally a Lazy Susan with a bunch of LED UVs. We're going to set all the parts in here as best we can. Sometimes you have to go multiple bouts with it. There's a light here, and a light here underneath the turntable. And there's a manual light. So if you bring it out and there's still stuff left to cure, you can manually cure the parts as needed. Got a lot of hair. Tail piece. The other thing is this thing also still has to be able to spin, which means nothing can hang off the edge of it. That's been a problem I've had before. Oh no! Thankfully that's a big bulky part. It's not going to break. We're going to go through and get what we can. The first go round, we have to cure some more. It's not the end of the world. Little hands in the middle. And then this won't start unless this has been set back over it. And we're going to give this a full 10 minutes. I like to give a lot of time for curing. We just let that go. So, in a little bit, we'll reconvene, and then we'll talk about kind of what happens after that. We'll generally, after curing, you're going to be going through and trying to remove a lot of your little supports. All right, so now for the moment of truth. We're going to take a lot of the parts out of the curing station now that it's done. This would be the first time you want to touch the parts without gloves. We've already gone through enough to kind of make sure that we're not going to get drenched in resin. We'll bring the parts out. They should have a very consistent, cloudy kind of finish. If you had a clear resin, they would be not clear. That's a whole misconception, is that they will be completely clear. Once they cure, they actually get really cloudy. So just be cognizant of that. I'm just going over this really large piece real quick because it has a lot of cavities. And I'm just looking for anything that may still need to be cured. If it looks kind of wet still, it's generally an indication that there's still some resin that needs to cure. This actually all mostly looks fine. This still needs some curing. The leg itself has a lot of sheen on it, probably because it was shielded from the light by other parts. So we're just kind of go over it slowly. Now these don't release an odd odor. Like if you use actual UV resin to make effects or things like that, that smells like you can smell it curing because it releases a lot of organic volatile chemicals the moment it does. Another place that's really good to try and manually cure will be these sockets, the joins. They will probably be your most prone. These are actually all fine. Once you can see the layers under the UV light, that's a good indication you're really well cured. This is fine. A lot of remnants from the supports. Not super happy about it. It's all unavoidable to some degree. I'll have to sand those away where I can. And there's a few small supports still on here, so we'll pull those away. For the really small ones, I just use these tweezers. For larger ones, a lot of times stuck in between larger pieces, I'll use the snips themselves. Like there's a huge array. Ooh, there's a bunch of resin right there. Let's go through that. There's a lot of marks on this too from the supports. This will be a lot more painful to essentially sand down because it's not a plain surface to begin with. But my primary concern is up front. Like it left resin behind just from setting down, so I got to get all this cured. The good thing is this is just as strong as the light that it was under a second ago. It'll only take a few seconds for it to cure out. Dun, dun. It's already mostly all gone. Trying to see if there's any other sections. No, it's just the one. Another really interesting thing is a lot of times if you can't find supports, they will glow under the black light a little bit differently. So it's a good way to find pieces of crap left over. That looks better. So let's get back to try and separate all these extraneous supports. Ooh. Also, don't be worried if you scratch it, because if you're like me, you're going to paint this thing in inevitably, and you're going to have to do a lot of sanding by the time you get to it. And you'll know when you do your initial prime, which we'll do. I'll have a separate video talking about how to prime these things. Like you'll know then how bad your divots and everything affect the coverage. Oh, just stabbed myself. There's some more resin on that side. Let's try this bastard out. Break off some of these supports while we're at it. I'm not right-handed, so that's going to be awkward. A lot of tearing there. It's kind of odd. It's almost like... Oh, that's... So this is a chamber. Depending on the slicer you use, a lot of times they'll warn you when you go to print that, like, hey, there's a closed cavity. You should drill a hole out. The reason being is because this happens. You get this buildup of resin, and it kind of cures. It got really mushy. It looked really kind of odd. We're just going to clean this out as best we can. I've learned the hard way, don't be a perfectionist. It's not possible. Unless you made the model, then it is definitely possible, because you can always go back to the drawing board and change the model. That looks good. Alright, on to some other parts. Hand actually looks fine. It transferred some paint from the silicone. Let's get that off. Hand looks fine. It's fine. This hand has a crap ton of supports on the interior for some reason. On the inside where you have female to male sockets for connectors, you need to get all, and I mean all, of the supports off. If you have a stub of one, it may literally keep you from joining the parts together correctly, or it'll leave a giant gap. Nothing more than a pain in the dick than that. So here on this leg we got some more little supports. Ow. That looks like a support. That doesn't. That looks like the design, maybe. Little part. So like there. Leave that in there, and that will never attach correctly. Now, this is hair. It's supposed to be hair. Oh, see there on the inside in the corner, there's a little support. I'm going to go a little bit further with this one, and I'm going to take a file to that corner just to make sure it's been removed. Better. We'll just start moving all the other bunch, just like the rest of the hair. There's just a bunch of these tiny little supports. I think this is bad, using FDM printer. I've fought with FDM, especially if you use PETG a lot. Stuff can get really aggressive. If you do anything with food, you kind of have to use PETG. You can't use PLA. So it'll just leach plastics into anything that you're eating or drinking. So that's why a lot of the other thing is PETG has a higher thermal tolerance. So if it's going to get hotter than normal, you would use PETG. So like my Camelback that I run with, the hydration tube mount broke, and I was going to print that in PLA, and then I remembered, like, oh man, that thing's, I run out in like 90-degree weather. Probably not a good idea to do with just PLA. Oof, man, this part is rough. A lot of residue.
parts that get really fine like this, come on now, tend to have a lot of kind of scoring, just because there's so much give when the big supports come off. Still not too bad. It maintained its shape. And there's a couple more here. I'm gonna try to break those off. Not, like I said, it's not about perfection. It's about trying to get it as close as you can to get ready for priming and painting. So now, let's double check to make sure a lot of these parts fit. I don't even know if that's the right leg. Okay, those fit, not a lot of gap. Hands. Oh man, there's still another thing. Like I said, don't try to affix these now. You can, but it's more painful to paint an entire figure at once if you can paint the pieces individually. You just have a lot more flexibility and control if it's all separate. I'm actually going to cut that specifically, not try to, because that finger is really tiny. I do not want to risk breaking it. There we go. And then we will break those off. All right, hand is good. It's very detailed. I like this ABS resin. You sacrifice a little bit of quality, not much, all things considered. Obviously, that's not that hand. That connection's good. These will be mechanically sealed with CA gel when we go to finish it. These connectors are way too small to put magnets in. All right, that's good. Tail comes into the back here. No problem there. I don't know how that's gonna... Oh, because that part goes in. Okay, duh. I was like, wow, that doesn't feel like it's... Okay, that connection's good. And then the other part of the tail should connect here. We're just trying to make sure we don't have any gaps that are going to give us problems later. All right, now, so everything that we've printed so far looks good. What I'm going to do now is essentially clean up. A little late. I'm not going to bother printing. The rest of this is huge. The base is 3 parts unto itself. There's like 19 smoke parts. Not a lot of that matters. And the face, the hair for the face is practically as big as this part. So I got to print all that out, and then we'll start priming. I'll worry about affixing it to the base last, but then after all of that, we will start painting, and we will start with building a rubric or a plan for how we are going to paint it. Now, this is a well-known character. This is Delta from Eminence and Shadow. I have a lot of pressure for this one because I can't fuck this one up. My wife asked for this one. But there's no shortage of information about her, one of the most popular characters. But also the original design had some really great renders. I will not be painting the eyes for this. I will be trying to water slide them. I redesigned the eyes manually in Inkscape in Vector to get a vector graphic. And I'm going to print that onto water slide paper and try to slide that onto her eyes. Most professional figures actually are done that way, namely because the scale is really small and it's really hard to get a lot of detail. So it's easier just to kind of slide it on. And actually most garage kit companies, that's how they're going to do it. Very difficult skill. Should be easy. Not so easy. But like I'll have an entire video on just that water slide because I have a sacrificial figure we will practice with. We'll walk through like, now we're going to transfer it here just to make sure it goes there using Soul Set and everything. And then after that, we will get into actual painting. Now, give you a heads up, I do use paintbrushes, but that's not my first pass. I do not follow the school of Mamicon and a lot of the big ones where their mantra is start with the darkest colors first. I am a coverage person. So I'm going to take apart and I'm going to say, what is the primary, the color that is most common in this? And I'm going to, after it's been primed, airbrush that color on. And then I will do the differences. We'll talk about some tools, the trade for using blue tack as kind of a shield. Cards were recommended to me, playing cards. They're really great for shields because you can kind of bend them. You can get them between two things because it's just a plane. And that the great thing about an airbrush is if it's done right, it is a very consistent application. There's no brush strokes, obviously. Skin looks really good when it's been airbrushed. Not a lot of skin here. Most of this figure is going to be black, and it will probably just stay as primed, and then we'll have the details over the prime. The Citadel black, the Citadel Chaos black that I use has a nice sheen to it, so it looks reflective, almost like it's got a satin kind of, or a glossy kind of finish. And then after that, we will start going through details. Like we'll actually go over these in Turbo Gold, Gemstone. The hair is going to be difficult. There's a lot of highlighting. We will probably have a individual session purely on the ears and the hair, like the tufts of hair here, just because there's a base layer, and then most of it is essentially then highlights on top of it. Not going to do any volumetric lighting. There's no light sources in this diorama. So yeah, I'd say we're probably good for tonight. So thank you for spending some time with me, and look forward to the next Delta video in which we will begin kind of, I'm not sure if we're going to do water slide or the paint prep next time, but I guess we'll see you when the next video comes up.